Airplane mode.
Alright. You ready to kick it off?
Yeah, let's do it. Alright.
Well, hello friends, and welcome to this live stream with my good friend Jim Lill. I'm so blessed and thankful to know Jim. He's been a really good guy. I met him a number of years ago, and I've kind of helped out a little bit in some of his videos, and he's kind of borrowed books from me at times, and texted me oddball questions. And so I asked Jim to do a live stream with me, and I was just kind of lackadaisical about, we can just, kind of have a little fun. And Jim takes all these things so seriously, and which I love. And he really focused it down to where we're going to talk about Nashville session guitar players from 1950 to 2022. So really excited about this. Jim has put a lot of work into this. I have, just years of crazy experience, but I'm going to stop talking. Okay, Jim.
I only know one speed. So I wanted to talk about Nashville session players, not because I'm an expert, I'm not. It's actually the opposite. I don't really know much about history. Certainly know more than a lot of viewers to this channel. They probably know more than I do, but I know how to use the internet, and I can spend some time on Wikipedia, so that's what I did. And I tried to think, how do I figure out who all these session players were? Because usually I hear about it from like other players I talk to, and they're like, oh man, no, Harold Bradley, you gotta hear about Harold Bradley, he did the, whatever, and I don't know what they're talking about most of the time, so I wanted to catch up on that, and I thought it would be good to create a resource where other people can catch up on that as like a starting point. So how do you figure out who all these session players were? Do you buy all the CDs? I couldn't do that. Do you buy all the vinyls? What I did is I went to the CMA Singles of the Year nominee Wikipedia page, and it's really long. It goes back to '67, and what I did, as with most things, is I made a spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet goes from 1967 all the way to present day. And what I did is I got every single nominee for Song of the Year, and then all the guitar players who played on the album that song was on. And then I pooled those together, counted them up, and ended up making a list of Nashville session players. So what I want to do, because this is something that is really hard to do, is I want to be able to put a face to these names, because that's something that isn't in the liner notes. I've seen the names and I've heard the playing, but I never connected who's playing on what and like who they are. So that's what I'm going to do today with Zach, is we're going to go through a timeline of Nashville session players and tones, because we're going to be hearing how the tones change throughout the years as I play the examples for stuff. And to kick things off, I just want to go into how tones are made. So I know nowadays tones are made in the studio a certain way. You mic an amp and you play a guitar through it. But I didn't know if that's how it always was. So I called someone who's been around since the 60s. Since the 50s, actually. His name's Wayne Moss. We're going to talk about him a bit later. But this is what he had to say. Hey, is this Wayne?
Yes.
Hey Wayne, my name is Jim. I'm a younger guy in Nashville, and I'm trying to get a sense of history of how guitar sounds have been made throughout the years, and you seem like the guy to call.
Okay, let me say this. The only thing I've ever done is to plug a guitar in the amp and play. That's it. The only two amps I ever used was a Gibson and a Ampeg. The reverber rocket is the one I used on Only Daddy Will Walk the Line, and the Gibson's the one I used on Pretty Woman. The telephone mic is what I use in my studio.
Do you put it right up on the amp, or do you back it off and use room mics?
If it's the only guy in the studio, you can put it anywhere you want to. If you've got a room full of people, it'll bleed into everyone else. So you use at a low level, but the microphone close. Ain't rocket science.
Is that how it was back in like 50s and 60s when you were starting out too, or did they do stuff different back then when they had fewer tracks to go to?
That's how we did it, starting in the 50s and 60s, yes.
So it turns out this whole time, people have been close micing guitar amps and playing guitars through them, and that's kind of how it's gone. And yeah, we're gonna go through a timeline of that stuff today. Zach, you want to check chat while I switch over into the 50s?
Yeah, we don't have any comments yet, so I think people are just listening at this point. So
Cool. Well, to get us in the mood for the 1950s, I thought it would be very cool if we could use one of these. This is a Fender Tweed Harvard, and is this 59 that you have?
yeah, it's a 59.
Yeah, so we'll set the stage for some 50s guitar tones. Back in the 1950s, Nashville was pretty new to the whole recording thing. Maybelle Carter and Jimmy Rogers recorded stuff in Tennessee, but it was Bristol. It wasn't in Nashville. So after World War II, some studios got set up, and if I remember right, the big two were like Columbia and RCA. Those were like the two competing labels.
Yes.
And so on one side, on the Columbia side, you had like Bradley, what was it?
Owen Bradley.
Owen Bradley. And then on the RCA side, it was Chet Atkins that was in
Yes.
charge.
Yeah, but later on. So Owen was really the father of the Nashville sound, and Chet was kind of a guy that was actually playing sessions for Owen, and he kind of learned the ropes by watching how Owen Bradley did sessions. And so the real father of the Nashville sound and the kind of the first great producer in Nashville was Owen Bradley. And he's really not given enough credit. Chet, as amazing as Chet is, Chet got more credit than he probably deserved when books were being written in the 60s and 70s. But there's a great podcast called Cocaine and Rhinestones, and they really go into how these studios started in radio stations, and they kind of went from there. And Owen was one of the first real producers, and he was a pianist, and he was showing people the parts to play and things like that. So yeah, so Owen Bradley.
So I have this stack of awesome country music trading cards that
Yes.
we'll be showing you today. And to kick off the session player parade that we have here, we got Grady Martin. So Grady Martin was part of the A-Team and was one of the first electric players on Nashville Hits. In 1949, he was the lead electric player on Red Foley's Chattanooga Shoeshine Boy. And a fun tidbit is he was the first guy to use fuzz tone when a console channel bugged out on the Marty Robbins song Don't Worry in 1961, but that was a fluke, not his normal tone. And he's the lead guitar on the left side of Kiss Me Quick by Elvis, and the electric guitar on the right side of Patsy Cline's Crazy. So this is what Grady Martin sounded like in 1949.
It's a wonderland.
So one of the things that strikes me as soon as I hear that is just how dry the guitar is.
Very dry.
So you didn't have spring reverb yet. You didn't really have plate reverb. They created tape echo a little bit during that time period, but that wasn't really commonly used. And so on this recording, I mean, it's so dry. It's and it's all somewhat kind of twangy, because at that point you couldn't really get fat guitar sounds because it wouldn't really reproduce well. And he's probably using that Bigsby guitar that you show in the picture with single coil pickups and such. So which was like the top of the line guitar that you could get. If you were a really hot rod guitar player, you had a Bigsby guitar and you had a Standell amplifier with a JBL speaker, and you were, and that's what these guys had.
So the next guy on the list.
All right, next guy Let me get up here on it. Is Chet Atkins. So Chet Atkins moved to Nashville in the mid-50s while playing guitar with the Carter family, became Mr. Guitar, and had successful instrumental recordings of his own while also working with other Nashville artists. He worked with Gretsch guitars and was really influential in the way he used his thumb pick, and in 1957 was named head of RCA Victor, one of the big labels at the time. His transition to label head and producer led to the success of many Nashville artists and songs. That's a huge part of the Nashville music history. You can hear Chet's electric rhythm playing on Hank Williams' songs Jambalaya and Your Cheatin' Heart. In 1952, the Everly Brothers' Bye Bye Love in 1957, and his lead playing is showcased on Chet's recording as an artist, including his own hit, Mr. Sandman, in 1954.
Yeah, so that's Chet Atkins.
Yeah.
And Chet's one of the guys when I was looking at this list that I was like, I know that guy. I can't do anything he does. That's about as far as I can get with it. But I do have a nice scratch, and it's really fun to use.
Yeah, and you know, Chet, he was just a guitarist that was influenced by Django Reinhardt and Merle Travis and whatever guitars he could listen to. But he was initially, it was all about solo guitar, because that's about what that thumb style of guitar is about, playing guitar by yourself. And even though it does obviously work also in the context of a band, but the whole style of playing the bass line and the melody and the rhythm, that was all about playing playing by yourself. But that's why also on his records, where he's kind of doing more of the thumb picking thing all the time on early records, and then he starts kind of playing the melody more by the time you get into the 60s.
And another guy in the 50s is Ray Edenton. He was the one playing the syncopated acoustic on the Everly Brothers' Bye Bye Love. And according to the Country Music Hall of Fame website, he usually played rhythm and acoustic. But you can hear his lead electric playing on Marty Robbins' 1956 song, Singin' the Blues. So that's Ray Edenton. By the way, all these players played on like 1,000 songs that we've all heard, and and we're giving them each 20 seconds just as like a dip your toes in the water kind of thing.
Yeah, this is to help you get excited about these guys and dig more into it. So because again, this is we're covering decades of players.
Yeah.
So
the entire history.
Yeah. All right, I like this guy. This guy is really got kind of an early start. Pete Wade, very early on, played the electric guitar on the biggest country hit of 1956, Crazy Arms by Ray Price, and another big hit in 1957 with Young Love by Sonny James. He went on to play guitar on Tanya Tucker's Delta Dawn, George Jones's He Stopped Loving Her Today, Jeannie C. Riley's Harper Valley PTA, Lynn Anderson's Rose Garden, and John Anderson's Swinging, and the solo on Charlie Pride's 1981 hit Mountain of Love.
So this is Pete Wade back in 1956 doing the rhythm in Ray Price, Crazy Arms. It's fun hearing the old way of singing when people were still kind of being operatic about it.
Yes. And one thing that there was, even before the Tic Tac, the Dano Bass 6 was used, there was a lot of where the guitar player was playing a unison line with the bass to help it pop out, because most of the time it was upright bass and they really hadn't perfected miking it yet. And so that's why you hear a lot of the, and many times an electric guitar would be doing it, or let's, here I am totally got it. But in a 50s guitar track, and especially it being, again, really dry, like you hear people doing. Yeah.
So that's kind of an overview of the 50s. Those are some of the guys and some of the playing examples, so you can actually hear like what the 50s sort of sounds like. Now we're going to move on to the 60s.
All right. And we're moving.
So
And it's good to see Heaven Wreck and Sean McGee.
So in the 1950s, recording in Nashville was really new, and people were just like getting acceptable sounding recordings. It was very novel. In the 60s, things started to progress a little bit more, and there were more techniques kind of formed. This is a 1960s guitar amp. This is Zach's 64 or 65 Deluxe Reverb.
Yep.
So the first guy that we're going to talk about in the 60s will be Hank Garland. And Hank Garland, he was here in 47. He moved to Nashville at age 16 in 1947. He had success as a solo artist. He had success as a session musician. And in 1961, at age 30, he got in a car crash that left him with brain damage and ended his career. He was the main guitarist on Roy Orbison's Only the Lonely, and according to Elvis Presley, discographer Ernst Jorgensen, he played the lead guitar on the left side of Elvis' song Little Sister in 1961. So, Elvis' Little Sister is a song that later got done by Dwight Yoakam, and this is Elvis' version.
Yeah.
That's the first one that I listened to where I was like, this sounds like what guitar playing kind of turned into. That sounds like licks that I would play.
Yeah, you start to have more of a blues influence, and also, you know, there's more bending, and also the guitar has a little bit more room. It's gotten a little bigger sounding, you know, and you start hearing a little bit of verb and things like that, which, you know, of course, that would have been early on for what year was that again?
61.
61. So that would have been, that probably would have been studio reverb that was being used on there, not, you know, not amp verb. I guess it could have had an Ampeg reverber rocket that I think, you know, would have had that at that point. So, which is very possible. But yeah, you start getting string reverb.
So the next guy on the list.
Yeah, the next guy. So this is Harold Bradley. Harold Bradley, who co-owned the Quonset Hut studio. He played electric and acoustic, but apparently he's the one who popularized the tic-tac, which is playing the electric 6-string bass, palm muted to get a ticky-tacky sound. You can hear it on the left side of Only the Lonely by Roy Orbison.
Yep. So that's the tic tac. That kind of sound right there. This is a Jerry Jones, and this ended up being kind of a cool thing that people in Nashville would use starting in the 90s. It's like a reproduction of the old Danos that would have been used by Harold Bradley.
Yeah, and Harold again was the brother of Owen Bradley, and so that was, you know, that's why he was a co-owner in the Quonset Hut, and he was the head of the musicians union for many years. So all through the 90s and early 2000s, he was the head of the Nashville Musicians Union.
Yeah. And this is a 6-string bass, so it's tuned the same as a guitar, like, but since it's so low, it doesn't sound very good with chords, and generally people just go like, and you can hear that top end on it, that like pluck sound that normal basses like, versus, yeah. So this ended up being kind of a staple, and we're gonna come back to this like all the way in the 80s and stuff. The idea of a 6-string tic-tac. Zach, you
Fred
got Fred
Carter?
Carter? Yeah.
All right, I like this guy a lot. Fred Carter Jr. According to the Country Music Hall of Fame website, when Carter landed in Nashville in 1961, he became the first top Nashville session guitarist to specialize on the Fender Telecaster electric guitar. And a verified example that you can hear really well of Fred Carter Jr. playing the electric guitar is on Ian and Sylvia's version of Wheels on Fire on their Nashville album in 1967. So just to give a little more info on Fred. Fred was from northern Louisiana, and he was part of this school of what we call the Louisiana Hayride guitar players, which include Billy Sanford, and James Burton. All these guys that all played with light gauge strings, which was a big deal because everyone was using the wound third, and so they were taking banjo strings. And they were using those plus regular guitar strings to make these really light sets. And that's where you start getting that string bending sound that you hear that James and Fred Carter Jr. and Billy Sanford all did on session work. And again, one of the reasons I love Fred is that he was, I didn't know about it until in the last 10 years, was that Fred was the guy that kind of brought the twangy string bending Telecaster sound to Nashville.
Yeah, can we get reverb on this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so on that recording, the thing that I noticed is spring reverb in a lot of it, and it's kind of a sound that I associate with like Buffalo Springfield, in the, like, for what it's worth, the something's happening in here, whatever. And I think Neil Young played that guitar, and it was around the same time period. So when I heard that recording, I was like, oh, that's like a sound from that time where it's the high bending is very clean, but it has like the... sound there.
Yeah.
And that's something that when I hear music, I can kind of date it to the late 60s if I hear that, because before that, like we heard, everything was just super bone dry.
Right.
And then once we get to the 70s, things will get a little bit different, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
So the next guy that I have is Wayne Moss. And Wayne Moss is the guy that you heard on the phone recording earlier in this video. And this guy was the electric guitar player on Oh Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison, and you can hear him play the lead guitar on Waylon Jennings' Only Daddy That'll Walk the Line. He's the one that did the solo on that, and that's kind of a solo that a lot of country guitar players have to learn at some point, and is really fun, and just another step forward in like country guitar. So smooth.
That's a great solo. A lot of people kind of simplify it and play other things. But yeah, Wayne was another thumb picker that came into town, and he was smart in that he knew that he wasn't going to get anywhere trying to pull like Chet Atkins. And it's like you've got to figure out your own thing, and he did. I mean, and so that's one of the best country guitar solos of all time. Only Daddy That'll Walk the Line.
Only Daddy That'll Walk the Line. So now we're going into the 70s. And we're going to take this amp out. We're going to put a different amp in there, or for the 70s. No, we're going to keep this amp for the 70s. Yeah, we got a special one for the 80s that we're going to have going on. But I think you have the next guy.
Okay.
Jimmy Capps.
Jimmy Capps.
Jimmy Capps.
Jimmy Capps, his first big break was playing guitar for the Louvin Brothers, and he ended up being a member of the Grand Ole Opry Band along with having an incredible session career. He played both electric and acoustic and is credited on Stand By Your Man by Tammy Wynette. He Stopped Loving Her Today by George Jones and The Gambler by Kenny Rogers. You can hear his electric playing on the right side of Brown Eyed Handsome Man by Waylon Jennings. Maybe listen with only the right earbud because there's a loud harmonic on the left side drowning everything out.
Yeah, so this is just the right side. Yeah, so that is kind of the beginning of the 70s. I think that recording was 1970 with the getting that little stutter.
Yeah.
that Wayne Moss kind of hinted at in the solo in the beginning of the Only Daddy Will Walk the Line solo. Yeah.
That same kind of thing.
Yeah. So Jimmy Caps went in there and made a decision like, I'm gonna play this, make it sound like a Waylon song.
Yeah.
And the next guy that I have is Johnny Christopher. Johnny Christopher worked in Memphis and Nashville, and there's not much info out there about him other than his name, appearing as a guitarist on a lot of big albums that came out. And he co-wrote the Willie Nelson hit Always on My Mind. Unfortunately, I don't have an electric guitar part that I've confirmed to be his, but this guy's name was on so much stuff, you know, it's worth learning about, and I'm going to do a deeper dive on this guy once I get out of here because...
So I know some Johnny Christopher stuff because I met him.
Oh, that's cool.
And so he, I met him at a friend's house when I was in college, and then I found out some more information about him later. But he was he was a Memphis cat, and he was part of the kind of late 60s, early 70s, you know, Memphis guys along with Reggie Young. So it came down to where Reggie was playing electric guitar and Johnny Christopher was playing a lot of acoustic guitar. And so he even played on some Elvis stuff. And when he moved, because the whole Memphis scene fell apart, and all those guys ended up moving here. They moved to Nashville. And so Johnny Christopher ended up, you know, getting successful as a songwriter and then also as an acoustic guitar player. So you hear him a lot on everything from you know, Willie Nelson records and all sorts of records. He kind of, you know, in that kind of 70s, early 80s, he played a lot of acoustic guitar on stuff. But he's best known for being the, you know, one of the writers on, you know, Always on My Mind, which, you know, I think, you know, when he came over to my friend's house and we were over there in college, he of course sang the song.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, you gotta.
Yeah.
When you get there, sing the song that got you there.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and the next guy that you mentioned, talking about Johnny Christopher, is Reggie Young.
Okay, so I appreciate, you know, Jim letting me you know, do this.
This one's a big deal.
Yeah, this one's a big deal for me. Reggie Young worked as a session player in Memphis playing on big recordings, then moved to Nashville and became the top electric guy in Nashville for the 70s and 80s. His name came up 25 times in the spreadsheet, third most of anyone all time. One of the things he's known for is playing the electric in the 1974 pop hit Drift Away by Dobie Gray. He also played the electric solo in Merle Haggard's 1980 country hit I Think I'll Just Stay Here and Drink.
Yeah. So this is Dobie Gray. This is Drift Away.
Day after day,
So, you know, I have to say more about this because this is something that Reggie told me, you know, offhanded, and this kind of supports the whole thing. Why don't session players get part of the songwriter credit? Well, the intro to that song was actually an instrumental that Reggie Young had written, and he hadn't recorded it yet, but he just kind of offered it up as the intro to this song, and it's very iconic. I mean, it really kind of, and he's the guitarist playing all the fills during the entire song. So verses, choruses, the solo, all of the electric guitar work is him. And he used two different guitars. He used a Les Paul Deluxe to play on the verses, and then to do the twangy stuff, he used his Telecaster, his black '69 Tele that he got while he was there. And yeah, Reggie was just probably one of the finest and most influential, you know, guitar players after the original A-Team guys. And yeah, I could go on talking about Reggie Young for hours. And but those are really great examples because Dobie Gray's Drift Away, that was right when he moved to town, and it was a big hit. It was a big pop hit, which is always what country artists are after. Country artists are always after a crossover hit. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You know, they can say all they want, but everyone wants a pop hit. And so Dobie Gray had a huge pop hit with Drift Away, and because of that, everyone wanted Reggie to play on the record. So it was the greatest, you know, kind of introduction for him into the Nashville session scene, was playing on a huge pop hit.
And this is also the first time in this list of songs and players that we've heard swirliness. So, so the effect that I have on right now is called phaser. And I think it was the MXR Phase 90 that was the first like popular compact like stomp box that people would buy and use. And this is the sound I associate with Reggie Young because I've listened to a whole lot of 1970s Jimmy Buffett stuff that he played on. And that little lick he does at the beginning of Drift Away where it's like that kind of idea.
Yeah.
Like with the phaser and the super clean tone and everything. That's something I associate with that era and with Reggie kind of specifically.
Yeah.
Is that like little... And it has that swirliness to it. That's something that didn't happen in the 60s, and so this is like a marker. This is like a fence post saying you are now entering the 70s era.
Yeah, it would be, you know, it's a gross generalization, but it's also pretty true. Is that, you know, the 70s is the era of, you know, wah wah and phasing. It's just those are the effects that everyone was kind of wearing out at the time, and you hear it on everything. You know, there was just everyone was using a phaser, and you know, and you always, as a session player, you want to keep working, and and you just you get your phaser.
There have always been trends that wear on us sometimes, but are cool. This is Jerry Shook. He's another enigma. His name appeared all over the place in my research, but I can't pin down a specific electric part he played. I know he was one of the two guitarists on "Help Me Make It Through the Night" by Sammy Smith, which is a song written by Chris Christopherson. And since Chip Young did the nylon string signature lick, that must be Jerry Shook strumming the steel string acoustic. And he played for Ernest Tubb, Johnny Cash, Kenny Rogers, seriously too many stars to name, but I just can't find a confirmed part that's his. So that's Jerry Shook. And in this picture, it's cropped a little bit. Just over on the other side of this picture would have been Ringo Starr. He was doing something with Ringo Starr in this.
And that's obviously a vintage Dan Electro bass 6 that he's playing.
Yeah, vintage Tic Tac.
Yeah. So it shows that you know, that sound kind of kept being used for a while and then went out of favor in the 1980s. So.
Do you got the next guy?
Yeah. Here's another guy that I like. You know, because I like Telecaster guys. So this is Fred Newell. A lot of you, you know, or I'm just going to. Fred Newell is a multi-instrumentalist who has played acoustic, electric, banjo, and pedal steel on big recordings since the 70s. He played on albums by Alabama, Randy Travis, and more recently Chris Janson, along with many others, and played guitar on the TV show Nashville Now. He is the only electric player credited on George Strait's 1981 debut album Straight Country. He's one of 2 electric players on Amarillo by Morning, and you can hear Fred's electric playing on the 1977 Grammy-winning song Heaven's Just a Sin Away by the Kindles. And you've got to look up Fred Newell Orange Blossom Special. It is absolutely bonkers.
So this is the Kendalls. This is 70, what was it, 77?
Yes. So what I loved about Fred was in the 70s, the Telecaster sound was kind of becoming not cool again. And because it had been used a lot, and you know, guys were really kind of going for, you know, fatter sounds, dirtier sounds at times, and then of course the phaser sound. So all of a sudden, for a guy to play on the back pickup on a Telecaster and play these kind of Buck Owens-y kind of real twangy low string licks, that was really different, and it helped make the song kind of pop out, because most of the other guitar sounds you heard during that era were Les Pauls, you know, going through phasers and stuff. Everyone seemed to have a Les Paul custom at that time. But Fred, and then the fact that he played on Nashville Now, you have to remember that Nashville Now was, you know, a huge television show during the 1980s, and they would rebroadcast the show 3 times a day, and it was on, you know, cable when there weren't that many, you know, channels on cable TV. And so I and many others that grew up during the 1980s, we saw Fred a lot on television because he was on 5 nights a week. And then you could see him during, you know, reruns during the day. You know, they would play the last night's episode. So Fred, and then the Alabama stuff, you know, they were kind of hedging their bets on that, because Jeff Cook, who recently passed away, he, they were a bar band and they were good singers, but they needed a little help, and so they would supplement the Alabama band with some session guys just to kind of keep them, keep them in line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Gosh, I love that we can do this. This is so fun to be able to like lay some of this stuff out. We're gonna move on to the 80s. Corey, in that smaller gig bag, I have a Strat. Can you pull that out? So we're moving on to the 80s. The 80s is when effects started getting really popular, and there's digital recording that's kind of starting to happen in this era. And guitars get extra swirly. So we had a little bit of swirliness in the 70s with the phaser pedals. And in the 80s and then into the 90s, that got leaned on a lot as sounds started to get kind of cleaner in country music, like the mainstream countrypolitan, Kenny Rogers, Nashville sound kind of stuff. The guitars got pretty clean. There were a couple rebels along the way. Thank you. And a sound during this time that I kind of associate with 80s, 90s is the position 2 of the Strat. So I have a Strat here. This is my first guitar, my first electric guitar. And the second position of a Strat. It's kind of like a quacky thing to it. Yeah, just give me a little more. And it's out of tune too. Yeah, so that, as opposed to just straight. That's like instant Steve Wariner.
Yeah. It's that notched set. It's not out of phase. It's got some phase cancellation, which is what gives it that notched sound that we all love and remember. And it really became a very popular sound. And I think it goes back to Mark Knopfler and Clapton really popularizing the Strat in the 70s. And then I think the country guys were kind of catching up with that. So you had Sultans of Swing or Lay Down Sally that had these clean, notched Strat sounds. And I think, country music has always followed pop music and wanted to have pop success. So they're thinking, oh, this is the new popular guitar sound. Let's follow it.
Yeah.
So that's what they did. So all of a sudden you heard Reggie Young and others, doing this notched, Steve Wariner.
Again, as opposed to like. Like that's such a big change. I've done videos this year kind of exploring what makes the tone different. This makes the tone more different than most things you can do. Just that one change from bridge pickup to adding any of the other pickups in.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal.
It's because of the phase cancellation that goes on in there. And another thing, we pulled out this 1984 PV Special 130 because in the 80s things really shifted towards both direct and also using transistorized amps. So it's like during the 80s, if you watched a country band on television or live, so many times you saw walls of PV stuff everywhere, and everything kind of went away from tubes.
Yeah, but in high relief to the second position Stratocaster thing, we got the next player on the list.
Ray Flack is from England, and he didn't play on the same quantity of masters as the others on the list, but he played on some of the biggest songs of the 80s for Ricky Skaggs and Kathy Mattea, including Ricky Skaggs' 1982 hit Heartbroke. And his telly picking style on this song was more aggressive than most session players covered so far. It sounds a little like a precursor to the Brent Mason, Brad Paisley chops things that would come later.
I love that. That's so cool.
I can't tell you how much I love Ray's playing, and I love that solo. I mean, it's just it's fantastic. And there are clips of Ray, playing with Ricky, on YouTube that you can find. That it's just when Ray starts taking a solo, it's like fireworks are going off. I mean, it's just like this guy was so, and even the studio recordings don't really even capture all the fire of his playing. He's just so aggressive, heavy gauge strings, heavy handed, and just, yeah. And that's the kind of person he is. He's just, you know, aggressive, funny, yeah.
It's worth looking up everybody who's ever played for Ricky Skaggs. So many incredible musicians have come out of that. The pedal steel player Bruce Boughton played with Ricky Skaggs throughout like the Country Boy era, and then in the 90s Gary Morris played steel for him. Brian Sutton got his big break playing acoustic and utility for Ricky Skaggs. Brian Sutton played fiddle in Ricky Skaggs' band, I think. Like he was doing everything. And now there, I think like maybe Trey Hensley and some other people have played acoustic for him, and just all those people are absolute like monsters on their instruments. It's Ricky Skaggs attracts a lot of talent, and Ray Flack is obviously no exception.
Yeah.
And the next guy on the list is Chip Young, which is I think
Yeah.
on your pile there.
All right. Chip Young, whose real name was Jerry Stembridge, was taken under the wing of Jerry Reed and moved to Nashville in 1964. He played on all of Elvis's Nashville recordings from 1965 until Elvis died, as well as too many other big albums to list. He wore a thumb pick like Jerry and Chet Atkins. In an interview with NAMM, Chip said you can hear him playing with a thumb pick on I Can Tell by the Way You Dance by Vern Gosdin in 1984, and the electric 12-string intro on 5 O'Clock World by the Vogues.
Yep, so this is Chip Young playing electric guitar with a thumb pick. So that's something that he talked about in an interview, I think with NAMM, that I found online, where he said, oh yeah, I played electric with a thumb pick on that, and we overdubbed a harmony part to it. And so that's something that also kind of came into style, is that harmony thing, the guitarmonies of twin guitars doing all sorts of like Allman Brothers, but on two different guitars.
The harmonized sound became very popular because of what was going on in pop music. And so, you know, Andrew Gold had made that popular on like Linda Ronstadt records like When Will I Be Loved and things like that. And it became, you know, Nashville kind of latched onto that and would use that harmonized, clean, chorused sound, and it became a thing.
And the next guy that I have on this list is Dale Sellers. I had no idea who this was, but his name showed up so much, and he played left-handed. Like, that's the first thing that I noticed about him. Was like, wait, he's holding the guitar the wrong way. It kind of makes me dizzy. But he was a session guy. He was good at the instrument. He moved to Nashville in 1966, started session work in 69, and was a staff guitarist on Hee Haw, The Johnny Cash Show, and The Jimmy Dean Show. You can hear his electric playing on the song Rock and Roll Shoes from Ray Charles' 1984 Friendship album, which is Ray Charles' country duet album. So this is Dale Sellers. Yeah, the reason that I use the Ray Charles album is because the Ray Charles album has brilliant liner notes available like on Wikipedia, where it lists everything everyone did song by song, and that's not done often enough. So normally it'll be like a list of 7 people who played guitar on an entire album. You don't know what part they played, you don't know what song they played on, but for some reason that one Ray Charles duets album had everyone listed. It had like 4 or 5 Nashville session greats on it, and it said, oh, this guy played on, you know, side A, track 2, the electric guitar, and the other guy played on side A, track 5, acoustic guitar, and so you could really map it out, and that's how I found that he played that solo. You ready? Good. Next guy.
All right. I'm selfishly using a picture from a magazine because I interviewed him, and this is a picture from the article, so I'm going to selfishly use this. Richard Bennett was a successful LA session player who moved to Nashville in 1985 to produce and play on Steve Earle's Guitar Town album, and that's Richard on the 6-string bass intro. He then became a successful session player and producer in Nashville. He's also credited with the second guitar solo on Here's a Quarter Call Someone Who Cares by Travis Tritt.
Yep, so this is the intro to Guitar Town.
Guitar.
That was one of the first songs I played with my guitar teacher up in Michigan when I was first learning. He showed me how to play the... but on like a normal guitar. And it had tremolo on there too. Yeah.
Richard, he was one of the like later Wrecking Crew era, players, and he played with Neil Diamond forever. So all through the 70s and up through the mid 80s, he played with Neil Diamond. And some of my favorite stuff was he started producing, and he produced some Emmylou Harris records, which he didn't play on as much, but he produced some Marty Stewart records, and like a tune like Tempted he's playing the guitar solo on it. So on the you can always recognize Richard Bennett on the Marty Stewart records because he ends up playing a lot of the Gretsch stuff, and you even hear the Bigsby. And Richard's such a wonderful player, and of course he's been touring with Mark Knopfler since the mid '90s as his kind of second guitar player, which is kind of that's a big deal.
That is a big deal. And I found something on mixonline.com. It was an interview with Richard Bennett, and it's probably too small to read here, but it said that to do the guitar sounds on Guitar Town, they would do overdubs early in the morning, and Chuck Ainley, the engineer, had a Drummer 1960, which is a tube compressor that had an instrument input section. So they plugged the guitar straight into an outboard compressor and then looped it through something called a Rockman that people in LA were using at the time. And it was like a Walkman-sized cassette player that you could plug into and get this big processed wad of sound. That's how Chuck Ainley described it. He also said, but it wasn't really good sounding. My idea was, let's take this compressor and loop through all the outboard gear in the studio and create our own high-quality guitar processor. It was very experimental. So that sound that you're hearing is not a Boss TR2 into a guitar amp. It's plugging this straight into a compressor, and then that had an effects loop that they went through other things in the studio, brought it back, and then just recorded direct. Jimmy Bowen was the head of the label at that time, who signed Steve Earle. I think it was Tony Brown that signed him, and Tony Brown was answering to Jimmy Bowen. And so I think that in '86 was kind of like one of the first things that started the whole wave of digital recording, and like, this is something that is viable, you can get sounds out of it. And people obviously now feel mixed feelings about the whole digital thing, but like, it happened, and that was part of the history.
And that's a great recording. I mean, you can listen to the whole Guitar Town record, and it's just a great sounding album. So yeah.
Another guy that I have here is Pete Bordenali. This is another dude who I've never heard of before. Pete Bordenali, but he played guitar on some big Ronnie Millsap, Barbara Mandrell, and Lee Greenwood albums between '77 and '83, as well as other big artist recordings around that time period. He's the only person credited as playing electric guitar in the song God Bless the USA, along with Steve Gibson on acoustic, and we'll get to him. He played the gut string guitar on the 1984 Ray Charles Willie Nelson hit duet Seven Spanish Angels, and if you want to hear him play a solo, check out the song Who Cares from the same Ray Charles Friendship album. That's what I mentioned earlier. This album has such good liner notes that I was actually able to figure out who played what and attribute certain solos to certain people. So this is Peter Bordenali. So you start to hear a little bit of guitar-maze there on the end, some twin guitars.
And it's funny, there's always been a guy that's been like the rock dude. And so Pete Bordenali was one of the players that, I mean, he could do all sorts of stuff, but he was one of the first guys, and I shouldn't even say first guys, but he was one of the guys that in the early 80s, late 70s, he was considered more of like a rock guy. He would get dirtier sounds than some of the other guys, which still, by today's standards, are not dirty, but yeah.
Yeah. Next on the list is Billy Sanford. This guy was a staff musician for the Louisiana Hayride radio show and first came to Nashville in 1962. He became a prolific session player on popular music from playing the intro of "Oh Pretty Woman" by Roy Orbison. I think he was on like the 12-string or the acoustic. In 1964, to the electric solo on "I'm No Stranger to the Rain" by Keith Whitley in 1987. So this guy had a long career, and this was kind of toward the end of his popular recordings, but it was a big one. So this is Billy Sanford. So that's 1987. That's a year after Guitar Town. And boy, does that sound clean, direct, and Strat second position. That is one of the more 80s things in the 80s. That kind of sound right here. That quacky thing. That very much has the quacky thing going on.
That's one of my favorite, like Strat solos. And the first time I heard it, I thought it was Reggie Young. And,
It sounds like him, yeah.
Because he was one of the guys who was also popularizing that. And but Billy Sanford's another great player, and and that's it's a fantastic song and a fantastic solo. Yeah.
So closing out the 1980s, we have another very special guy.
All right, this is our friend John Jorgensen. He's lived in both LA and Nashville, but all throughout his career has spent time in Nashville recording music here as a session guitarist, playing on a lot of major label artist songs, including Pam Tillis, Leanne Rimes, and Kenny Chesney. The Desert Rose Band wasn't from Nashville, but John's solo in their 1989 version of Hello Trouble was the North Star for Brad Paisley for most of his life, and maybe still is. So check this one out. Okay, that just makes me smile because I've learned the solo, but I never could play it exactly up to speed, really cleanly and with assertiveness. And that was recorded with a made in Japan Telecaster, so a JV, a 1982 JV Telecaster, 3-color sunburst binding rosewood fretboard with an early 60s AC30 along with a Boss DD2 pedal. And it was mic'd up with a 421, and I can't remember what kind of EQ, and they probably used some compression after the fact. But that really is the template for Brad Paisley's guitar sound. And he would tell me over and over again when I was working for him, just make it sound like Hello Trouble and we'll be fine. Because times we couldn't do a sound check, and hugely important to Brad Paisley and to many of us. John, just an amazing guitarist.
Mm-hmm. And then we move on to the 1990s. And for the 1990s, in like rock and pop music, it started going to like grunge and less effects, less hair metal, more like direct, like kind of rootsy-er sort of just in-your-face things. And for country, there was a bit of a delay on that transition. And like I said about the recording direct, in 90, 91, 92, 93, people were very much going direct. So instead of a guitar amp, I'm bringing out a PA speaker, because this will give you the sound of direct. If we just plug into this, people would just plug in to the console and then put compressors on it, maybe EQ it, I think. Like, I was really surprised to learn from an interview that Zach did with Jimmy Olander that Meet in the Middle by Diamond Rio was just plugging into a Gates compressor and then straight in to the console. And another thing that kind of got popular in this time because of one of the players that we'll talk about soon is the 3-pickup Telly. It was something that started in the 80s with Joe Glazer. And by the 90s, a lot of people were doing this kind of idea and still playing out of second position and stuff. So let's see if I can give this a little more gain. So position 2 straight into one of these. And then, of course, with the kind of direct sound, it doesn't sound all that good by itself, so people have to add stuff to it, like this chorus. So that's kind of a certain thing. And when I was younger and getting into music, this era had passed. And so whenever I heard this, I thought, oh, it's so old and lame sounding. But yeah, when you actually plug in and do it, it's pretty fun because it makes everything you do sound interesting.
So that was a very utilized sound in the late 80s, early 90s, even if you think about Tim McGraw's Don't Take the Girl and things like that. They have very much that heavily chorused, direct kind of sound.
Very, very swimmy. Very just... But in the 90s in country music, also there was this guy named Garth Brooks.
Yeah.
And when Garth Brooks came along, he became the biggest star from like his first single, Much Too Young to Be This Damn Old, like hits. And then when it got to 1990, he put out an album called No Fences, and it had a song called Friends in Low Places. And the guy who played guitar on almost all of Garth's stuff is Chris Lusinger. And he was Garth Brooks' guitarist in the studio and on the road for the most successful country artist in the most successful time for country music. He's also played on a ton of sessions for other artists before, during, and after the Garth heyday, but Garth was so huge, that's where my mind goes when I think of Chris Lusinger's playing. So we can check him out on the electric guitar in the song Friends in Low Places. So that's Chris. And yeah, he played a Strat a lot, and he has like a website, and he has so much good information on it. Like a lot of players' websites are pretty bare bones, and they don't really have much. Chris puts like a lot of cool things up there, like fun pictures of him throughout his career and stories of different songs and whatever. And I learned from him that he played through like a Mesa, like a little Mesa boogie combo for a lot of the stuff. So a lot of the more overdriven things is like just this Mesa combo amp, like the solo in Shameless. And he also apparently really liked Rat pedals. And then around 95, he got an amp called the Bluesmaker, made by a guy named John McIntyre in Canada. And he had a couple of those that were his main session amps for a while. And then along with working with Garth, he worked with a bunch of other artists in the studio. One of my favorite songs that he played on is called She Ain't Right by Lee Brice. And there's two electric guitar players. There's Chris and there's JT Cornfloss. And we'll get to JT later. But yeah, Chris Lusinger, very cool. And you have Steve Gibson up next.
Yes, I do.
Sweet.
All right. Steve Gibson appeared in the spreadsheet 27 times, second most, and he was a session guitarist who played a lot of acoustic and a lot of electric on the popular music coming out of Nashville in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and even post-2000. He played the electric guitar intro signature lick Center Right in Hummingbird by Ricky Skaggs on the 1989 Kentucky Thunder album. Albert Lee played the lead guitar on the left side. And you can hear him play the really affected guitar on the left side of Hurt Me Bad in a Real Good Way in 91. That's a real favorite track of mine for him. I mean, he also played some really cool. He was into the Bigsby palm bender, and so which was kind of like having a B and a G bender that was, of course, affected by your hand, not strap activated. and that's him on some Randy Travis cuts. And Steve was the musical director for the Grand Ole Opry for many, many years, and he has been the musical director for the CMA Award show and also their CMA Christmas and all sorts of television productions for years and years. Just one of the great session cats, and also one of the guys that could just cover all sorts of different bases. And funnily enough, talking about chorus and such, he says his one regret is that he used too much chorus in the 80s.
Yeah. When it came to Steve Gibson, with a lot of these players, really, there are a lot of Ask Zach videos that are like good primary information sources when you interview these guys. And that was something that I took from that interview, is like, oh yeah, I played guitar on that song, and I wish I could take off all that delay in chorus from back then, but
Yeah.
so that was kind of fun to see, like, oh cool, even the people who were there like share some of the opinion of like, maybe we overdid it a bit much when it was new and exciting.
I'm going to take a quick pause just to answer a quick question that someone threw out there. So John Da Silva, thank you to all the Patreons. So this is, of course, being live for the patrons and for the patrons. And John Da Silva asked, not sure you're taking questions. Yes, we are. But when you get a chance, what year did Fender switch from a 3-way switch to a 5-way on the Strat? That was 1977. So in the switch was available much earlier than that, but Fender finally made the switch over to an actual 5-way switch not until 1977. So before that, people were either balancing the switch carefully, which it's possible but difficult. Some guys would even put a matchstick in there to kind of hold it in place, and they would just play in that number 2 or number 4 position all the time. And but yeah, and then other guys would get the 5-way switch and have it put in the guitar.
Yeah, and that's what this is, 5-way switch. So when you're in position 2, it has that clacky sound instead of the twang.
I'm out of tune. Wow. This one's not in tune.
The next guy we're going to talk about is Brent Mason, one of the guys that very much made this pickup scheme a popular thing to do, because he used it and he became so popular. Brent Mason is the #1 session player of all time when it comes to playing unpopular country music that the world is listening to. His name showed up in my spreadsheet 48 times. The next closest guy was Steve Gibson at 27. He's the Gretzky, the Brady, the Jordan. During the period of time where country music was the most popular and the most profitable, he was playing on the most hit songs. And he's still playing on popular country albums. His chops are incredible. His instrumental song Hot Wired is a must-listen for country guitar fans. And one of a million examples of his playing is the electric guitar on Alan Jackson's 1992 hit, Chattahoochee.
I can't tell you how many times I've had to play that lick.
Yep.
Starting from the early 90s playing in bar bands.
The first book I had was like a Hal Leonard country guitar book that had Folsom Prison Blues, Amy by Pure Prairie League, and Chattahoochee was like the hard one to figure out.
And what an amazing player who's had such a wonderfully long career. He still plays amazing, still going out and playing shows. He was playing of course you can follow him on Instagram and you can see he'll put up his phone in the middle of a session and you can hear him playing parts. He'll do clips of him playing with Ronnie Dunn, doing a bunch of Brooks and Dunn tunes, like for a songwriter event down in Florida. Just one of the nicest guys, and also I've got to give props to his wife Julie, who is just a wonderful person who kind of acts as his manager, and she's wonderful to deal with.
Yeah. One of the things that Brent has going on with his guitar, I'll hold up this picture again. So this is Brent's gray guitar, and he's used this for years and years and years, and it has 3 knobs on it. I don't think you can see it. Maybe you can in this picture a little bit, but there's 3 knobs instead of 2. So on this guitar, there's 2 knobs. There's a volume and a tone, and a 5-way switch. On this one, the middle pickup is controlled by the second of the 3 knobs. It's a blend control. So what that means is that Brent, instead of just having position 1 and position 2, he can blend in between those two. He can add the middle pickup in kind of as much as he wants to. And he did. And on Chattahoochee, you can hear it's not full back, and it's not full too, I don't think. It's kind of like this weird in-between thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of his solos are like that. But since it's just a nondescript dome knob, and we don't have video of him doing it, who knows how much he had it blended in. That's something that matters. Pickup position matters a lot. It sounds audibly different wherever you go.
Yeah, it's something that that makes it a very obvious difference. And yes, after I interviewed him, I checked out the guitar, and I heard it up close, and then I started re-listening to all these recordings, and I started hearing it more. And then when you get a guitar that you have wired up that way, you all of a sudden clue into this thing where it's all of a sudden, instead of using it, you can use it with a tone control like he does some, but also it's just a way of just softening the Telecaster thing just enough where it doesn't sound like a Strat, but doesn't really sound exactly like a bridge pickup on a Tele, because it's not. It's a blend.
It is its own thing, and very frustrating to try to copy if you're trying to get those tones.
An excellent example of it kind of turned up more, where that middle pickup is turned up more, is the Alan Jackson tune "Gone Country." Also, there's some chorus on there too, but there you can really hear, the blend where it's. Exactly.
Yeah, Brent Mason, big deal. Very, very good player. Also, something I want to point out in this picture, I kind of have it covered with the name, but in the late 80s at some point, Brent Mason had his gray guitar routed out and put a Floyd Rose in it, and you can see it in this picture. There's a Floyd Rose floating bridge here, so there's like this crazy metal, like Dimebag Darrell Pantera style whammy bar thing there, and then he eventually had that filled and put a normal bridge back on there. So yeah, this guitar has gone through some changes.
Yeah.
Is the next guy on the list Larry Byram? I think it is.
You have.
So, this is Larry Byram. Larry Byram is from Alabama, then moved to Los Angeles and played for Steppenwolf for a few years. They're the band that did Born to Be Wild and Magic Carpet Ride. Then he moved back to Alabama and worked as a session player in Muscle Shoals. He wasn't into country, but he moved to Nashville. He wrote a hit Tanya Tucker song called Feel Right and played sessions, often doing acoustic, electric, or slide. You can hear his electric lead playing on My Baby's Got Good Timing by Dan Seals from 1984. And he played the slide guitar on Travis Tritt's 1992 hit song Trouble. Of course, as made famous by the Graboid blowing up scene in Tremors 2. It's one of my favorite slide parts. It sticks in my head whenever I think like, oh. Yeah, and I never knew it was Larry Byram. And also, isn't this picture just amazing? This is from a Steppenwolf band photo, and it looks like it was taken this year. Like, this looks like something that someone in Nashville. This looks like Midland, you know?
It does. Yeah.
Is the next guy on the list Billy Joe Walker Jr.?
Billy Joe Walker Jr. Billy Joe Walker, the late Billy Joe Walker Jr., was a songwriter, artist, and producer, along with having a successful career as a session guitarist, playing both electric and acoustic through the 80s and 90s for Kenny Rogers, George Strait, Hank Williams Jr., Vince Gill, and many others. The solo songs I listened to of his were acoustic-led, smooth jazz instrumentals. But if you want to hear him play electric as a sideman, check out Which Bridge to Cross by Vince Gill in 1995.
Really sure that I know how to love one and tell one we're through.
So, Billy Joe Walker Jr. was kind of part of a 1-2 punch in the studio in the 80s. So he and Reggie Young would both play electric guitar on cuts. together, and they were able to they had kind of a sixth sense or some type of connection where they were able to quickly come up with parts that really complemented each other and sometimes using similar tones. So if you hear the Reba McEntire tune Little Rock, or a lot of the Steve Wariner stuff, it's Reggie and Billy Joe Walker Jr. sometimes playing electric, like on Linda. But then it's Steve Wariner playing the solo. But Billy Joe, of course, had a lot of success as a producer with Brian White, who had quite a few hits in the '90s, and he of course played guitar all over those.
Yeah, and in that little section there, like you can hear, it's not full bridge pickup. It's not. It's not a twangy thing. He's like off on something else, like neck pickup or something. Kind of making it sound softer in the background for Vince, and that sound isn't as present anymore. This is kind of, I think maybe the last time we're going to hear a neck pickup. Or even a middle pickup. From here on out, it's going to be a lot of bridge stuff. So starting somewhere in the mid '90s, people started getting less like direct sound, less like soft and kind of sterile with the swirliness, and more kind of aggressive in your face. And a good example of that would be one of the more aggressive in your face guys on guitar, Dan Huff. Dan Huff, this is another big one.
This has been mistakenly identified as Dan. That's not
no.
actually Dan Huff. So I'm sorry to say that, but yeah, that.
All right, I'll show you.
Yeah,
I'll show you this part then.
Yeah.
I googled Dan Huff and I was like, that's a great picture. Dan Huff is a guitarist from Nashville that was in the rock band Giant, and you can hear his playing on a ton of rock stuff in the '80s, like the guitar solo in Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins from the movie Top Gun. Then in the '90s, played on a bunch of country stuff like the guitar solo in Man, I Feel Like a Woman by Shania Twain. And in the 2000s, in addition to playing, he also got into producing and produced acts like Rascal Flatts and Keith Urban, and is the top producer to this day. He's the reigning ACM Producer of the Year right now. So this is the solo in Man, I Feel Like a Woman, Dan Huff.
Feel like a woman.
So now we're into pretty rockin' country guitar.
Yeah, and Dan's from Nashville. I mean, he's one of those like few that lived, grew up here, went to college here, and then he went off to LA and became a session player over there. And then he came back to Nashville as the scene in LA was changing, and he ended up playing on a lot of country records, and then just having a hugely successful career as a producer. And a lot of that comes from the experience that he garnered working with Mutt Lange on the Shania Twain records, because Mutt Lange was really a mentor to Dan Huff, and really kind of helped him get his shoes as far as a producer.
Yeah, and that's the '90s. So we've gone from Hurt Me Bad in a Real Good Way, which is like the direct chorusy thing, all the way up to, I think that was '97, where we got Dan Huff like playing through some distorted thing, doing the high, like more rock and stuff up there. And and then we got to get into the 2000s. So we're gonna do a changeover, because in the 2000s it was less common to play through just the console, and we're back to using amps. So the 2000s, that, because of when I was born, is like some of the first country music that I ever really got into. And people were using amps and cabs then. This is my custom half open, half closed cab that I made in a video earlier this year. This is the first public sighting of it with its new covering and stuff. I did this kind of over Halloween weekend. So this is that cab. And then when people started getting back to amps, I've noticed that almost everyone has a basement head. So I had to get a basement head. This is a Fender Bassman from 1966 or 67. And people use these because I think they love Fender amps, and session players have amp racks. So they can't fit a Fender Deluxe inside of their head rack case. I'm gonna plug this in because this is a 50 watt amp. It gets loud, so I have an attenuator. So yeah, I've seen this this style head in the racks of pretty much everyone. Like Bukovac has a blonde basement head, and I know that Troy Lancaster has a basement head. JT had a basement head. Jeff King has a basement head. Am I plugged in here?
Should be.
Sweet.
You're live.
Yeah, so when we get into the 2000s, the first guy that I'm going to talk about is Pat Buchanan. So Pat Buchanan is from Florida, and he started finding musical success in Atlanta, then toured with Hall & Oates, and then moved to Nashville in '94, and within a few years was playing big masters and still plays big masters to this day. I think he's responsible for most of the big soaring guitar solos I love so much on early 2000s Kenny Chesney songs like I Go Back and The Woman With You, but I can't prove it 100% because Kenny Chesney albums don't have detailed liner notes. But he is listed as playing the guitar solo in the 1999 Trace Adkins song She's Still There, and that very much has the same sound and feel as the soaring Kenny Chesney solo. So what I'm going to play right now is two of those Chesney solos and then the Trace Adkins solo, and you can kind of see if they have the same flavor. Yeah, so those Chesney songs were from 2004. The Trace Adkins songs from '99. Different producers, different bands, and everything. But Pat Buchanan was listed on both of those sessions, and they both had that same like kind of touch, the going up real high. And I think that Pat was playing a 335 on most of that stuff. And I don't have a 335, but I do have something that does have humbuckers. So there is this. And this is the Bassman with the settings on 446 with the bright on. And then you can dirty this up a pretty decent amount. So at this point, it's pretty commonplace, I think, in the studio to have a head in the rack and then your cab off somewhere in another room. So the actual volume coming out of the cab isn't very consequential. So whereas we heard Wayne Moss say, oh yeah, if you have the mic out here and your amp turned up, it'll bleed into everything else. Now it's like you can turn it up as much as you want to and it won't bleed into anything because these always go off in a different room. It's the same thing with the direct tones. Obviously direct tones aren't going to bleed into anything else, but now that we're back to amps, that was kind of the procedure for recording. Is you have a head, run a long speaker cable out to your cab, have the cab in a different room, you can turn up, and also distortion pedals started getting used. Not by everyone, but certainly there were tube screamers and there were Boss pedals and everything. And, yeah. You get a lot of sustain out of a tone when you step on a distortion pedal going to a Bassman with the volume on 4 or 5. So that's Pat Buchanan. He's one of my favorite guys. And after that we have Brent Rowan.
All right. And the other Brent. Brent Rowan played on his first hit in 1980 with John Conley's Friday Night Blues, then became one of the top session players of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, along with producing top artists. You can hear his electric playing on the 2005 hit Your Man by Josh Turner.
Be your man.
Brent is another one of the real chameleons in the Nashville session world that was really able to play everything. He was the first guy to have a Bradshaw rack in the mid 1980s, and that's him, like I was talking about on Don't Take the Girl, this really direct, heavily chorused sound. So he would do everything from big rack sounds to mono, amp rigs and everything in between. And probably, one of the most versatile and a very long, successful session career with a lot of different guitar sounds and such. That's him on all the Mark Chestnut, stuff also. Just and a great guy.
Up next is JT Cornfloss. JT is my favorite. He's my number one, and I love him. He came from Terre Haute, Indiana, moved to Nashville in 1982 at 19 years old, toured until 1990, then started doing demo sessions, then master sessions. And throughout the 2000s and 2010s, he played on a lot of the most popular music coming out of Nashville, and his name appeared on my spreadsheet 17 times. That's fourth most all time. I hope to make a much more in-depth video about him in the future, but for now, know that his peers viewed him as one of the greatest rhythm electric players, effective hook craftsmen, and I experienced more joy listening to his solos than anyone else's, and the song he's probably most known for is a great representation of all three of those. It has an awesome hook, a deep rhythm, and a wacky, fun solo. Check out A Lot of Leaving Left to Do by Dierks Bentley from 2005. And at the end of this clip, I'm going to play a section of an interview that he did with Bruce Boughton. He didn't do a lot of interviews, but he did do one for Bruce Boughton's radio show in 2017, I think. So we're going to listen to the song and then hear kind of what he was thinking when he was playing it. So.
Guitar part kind of feels like a Waylon record back. I mean, were you?
Well,
did somebody say that, or did you just say this?
No,
is
that's just sort of when they started running the song down. They were just kind of playing the galloping rhythm and stuff, and it just sort of entered my mind. When I first heard him sing the song, and I heard the lyric to the song and kind of what the spirit behind the song was, I wanted to go somewhere between Waylon and Mama Tried, with a little bit of Jerry Reed and a little bit of Fred Newell. And I tried to take all those things and mix them into one thing.
And it became JT.
I'll say one thing about JT is that Brent Rowan, who we talked about before, I remember visiting Brent Rowan on a session where he was the producer, and he's behind the desk. He's not playing. Well, the guitar player he hired was JT. That's how respected JT was. I mean, he was so versatile and so loved by the Nashville community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he played a lot of good hooks, and a lot of good solos, a lot of good rhythms. One takeaway I will give is that JT had this sort of scrappy rhythm thing that he would do and stuff that I just didn't hear other people doing. It was very aggressive and cool and twangy, and it was kind of like that kind of thing, like in A Lot of Leaving Left to Do. Like he would choose to do that a lot, where some people would just do diamonds. He did diamonds sometimes, but he had a real scrappy kind of rhythm thing about him. He could just lay down a groove, lock in with a drummer. Pretty cool stuff. Very, very fun to listen to. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum from JT, who is generally pretty twangy and country, we have a guy who's not twangy and country. We have Tom Bukovac. So Tom Bukovac is one of the louder Nashville session guys. He's a student of rock music from Cleveland, moved to Nashville and toured in the 90s, then got some big breaks in the 2000s and ended up being one of the top session players of the last 20 years. The different flavor he brought was so successful it kind of became the mainstream. Whereas most session players are a little reclusive, Tom shares all sorts of opinions over on his YouTube channel. Just search Bukovac, you'll find it. And part of what he initially got known for was the ability to do atmospheric stuff and delay tricks. So check out this layer from the 2007 Keith Urban song, I Told You So. I'm going to play the song first, and then Anything that was ever on Rock Band or Guitar Hero has probably made its way to the internet in isolated form. So we're going to listen to the song and then the isolated guitar part, and you can hear the crazy delay trails. And this was 2007, before a lot of people were doing this. So that's one of the things that kind of helped him get his foot in the door, is he was a big fan of Radiohead, and he could do little delay tricks like that, where he's hitting, I think they're just harmonics, maybe somewhere like, and then having delays sort of trailing off after that. And then that ended up being like a really common thing for people to do, is have a bunch of delays. Yeah. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. I'm more of a JT guy than a Tom guy, but
Tom's another one of the kind of archetypes of Nashville session players, that where he came along and a lot of guys imitated him, and because he became kind of the new thing, because he brought something different, because he was a rock guy. He was from Cleveland, not a twangy guy, just as Jim alluded. And he brought this rock sensibility and rock guitar playing and the use of echo in a way that a lot of Nashville guys hadn't used it before, and really brought a lot of different tones and different playing into country music.
yeah. So we have country guys, we have rock guys, and then up next we have a guitar player who has been pervasive in multiple areas of the industry.
So this is Paul Worley. He's a guitar player. He himself says he's a guitar player, and because he's a guitar player, he happened to fall into being a session musician, songwriter, producer, A&R guy, and record executive. He discovered the Dixie Chicks, produced Big and Rich and Lady A, was vice president of Sony BMG, and chief creative officer at Warner. And since the 80s, he's been playing guitar on a lot of big records. So we don't have a sample of him today, because it's, sometimes it's kind of hard to find, but I do know that John Jorgensen told me that he had played some of the guitar parts on, and maybe it was Memphis. So we weren't going to play it because we didn't know exactly which was which. But yeah, Paul, of course, and many times you would see him playing with the artists that he produced, like when they would first start out or be on television and such.
And since he produced Lady A, he's probably in some way responsible for this next guy getting a couple of his early big hits.
Yeah. This is Rob McNally. He's a soul guitar player. He toured with blues artist Delbert McClinton and started getting Nashville master sessions in the late 2000s. And now he's one of the top session guys. You can hear his playing on the slide solo in Randy Houser's Boots On from 2008 and Lady Antebellum's Need You Now from 2009. That tune really put him on the map, and he's again a wonderful guy, a wonderful player, and nice guy.
And then one more guy in the 2000s before getting to the 2010s, and that's Troy Lancaster. Troy Lancaster was born in Italy and grew up in Virginia before moving to Nashville. He started playing on big masters in the 2000s and still does to this day. And he has an instrumental album called Chameleon Parade that I found 4 days ago while researching, and it sounds so cool. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I kept it playing like front to back, and I don't do that super often. As far as hit songs, he's the only electric guitarist credited on Justin Moore's debut 2009 album. So you can hear his playing on those songs, including the #1 hit, Small Town USA. So this is Troy Lancaster.
USA, oh yeah.
And that solo there is like straight up down the middle Nashville session kind of guy in 2009 stuff. Chameleon Parade, his like solo album, has so many things like very orchestrated rock stuff, some good country stuff, and then like suddenly track 5 it's like bluegrass flat picking like Tony Rice, and I had no idea he could do all that stuff. He's one of my favorites.
Troy spent a long period of time, you know, in the '90s as, you know, playing on demos, and that's really where a lot of the guys, you know, during that time period, that was kind of like the going to university as far as learning how to play sessions. So, you know, guys would play on demo sessions, and then if they played on the demo, and then when it became when it was going to be recorded by an artist, then if they really liked what the guy played on the demo, they would have, you know, Brent Mason or someone else sometimes mimic that, and sometimes they would just say, hey, well, why don't we just go ahead and hire Troy? Yeah, so that's where a lot of guys moved their way up during that time period.
Yeah, and then we're going into the 2010s. And
We're getting closer.
for the 2010s, I'm going to swap out this cab. So up until this point, one distinction from the 2000s to the 2010s is in the 2000s, multi-effects pedals kind of didn't exist. There were some of them, they were kind of cumbersome, like the big Boss units and stuff. But then in 2009, Line 6 released a series of pedals called the M series, including the M9 and the M13. And those, as far as I know, were the first like reasonably sized pedals you could fit on a pedal board that had all sorts of effects, and they were like a few $100, and so anyone could use them. And I had a Line 6 M13, I had a Line 6 M9 at one point, and effects started getting really, really popular and used all over the place. And so almost like the 80s, the 2010s had a lot of guitar parts, thank you for helping me with this, that included multi-effects. We're going to put the basement back on top here. And this is a more modern style cabinet. So the other cab I had was sort of based on an old Fender. It had a weird back to it, but this is a more modern style cab. So this is a 212, and maybe more indicative of something that a session player might have played in the 2010s, but that's for another video. Okay. There we go. Yeah, so 2010s, more effects, country music's getting more pop, fewer people are buying music, iTunes shuts down, and now everything's Spotify streaming, and people are using track guides more often. So track guides are a thing in songwriting where there's 3 guys in the room, 2 of them are in charge of lyrics, and then one guy has a laptop. And he starts making beats and loops. Songs start becoming kind of one chord progression for the whole time, because that's just what happens when you take something and loop it out throughout the entire Logic session. And yeah, so that's just a change in music that's kind of happened in the past decade. And some people go against that, some people go with it, but it's definitely something to contend with in modern country. And one of the producers that's been really popular is Jay Joyce. Jay Joyce is one of the top producers in Nashville, working with Eric Church, Little Big Town, and Brothers Osborne, among many other successful acts. He's an aggressive, spontaneous rock and roll influenced producer, and he wears many hats on the albums he works on, including producing, engineering, mixing, programming, playing guitar, keys, and other instruments. And I'm pretty sure Jay is the one who played the outro solo in the Eric Church 2011 song Homeboy. So I have the isolated track and the regular track, so we're going to hear a full mix, and then we'll just hear the isolated guitar. And that's Jay Joyce. So we're pretty distorted at this point in time.
Yeah, that's fuzzy.
It's very fuzzy. Yeah, his records sometimes lean weirder and more spontaneous, and that's an example of a turning point where Eric Church's first 2 albums were pretty down the middle with some weirdness, but he had a song called Smoke a Little Smoke that a lot of fans really liked, and it was the weirdest song he'd ever done. And so for his next album, Chief, he said they said let's go in that direction. I think I read that Jay Joyce arranged that outro and showed it to Eric, and Eric was like, "What's this?" And they started loving the idea of like no more fiddle, no more pedal steel. Like, let's just be really aggressive with it. And that ended up being a sound, and the song Springsteen was like a huge hit from that album, and that pulled the genre in the direction of that. And then that's, you know, part of the history. So that's Jay Joyce. After that, we have Jed Hughes, and that's one of your guys.
Yeah. Jed Hughes is from Australia, came to the U.S. to play music, and by 2010 was playing guitar on big masters in Nashville, like Keith Urban, Little Big Town, and Eric Church, and he still plays on big records. Whenever I've heard him, it's usually something with a lot of texture, like effecty things or lo-fi things, not really the big polished, pristine cowboy chords. He was the only 6-string electric player on the 2012 Lee Brice song, One More Day. So that's Jed with the big reverby sound on the right side.
So contrast that with like in the 90s when the cool new thing was Brent Mason being able to like play really like, you know, like crazy. And then you have that, which was the cool thing in the past decade of like, let's play a weird shaped guitar like an airline or whatever and turn up the reverb, turn up the delay, and kind of just play something soulful and that feels like a soundtrack to a movie or something.
Everything Jed plays sounds like a soundtrack.
Yeah.
It's like even when he's just sitting around playing, and Jed's a phenomenal player, and it's like when I hear that song, I can hear some of that Mark Knopfler influence on there, but he's really kind of taken the tone in his own thing, and really beautiful guitar work.
And then you got Jerry up next.
All right, Jerry. Jerry McPherson started in the Christian music world and played for Amy Grant, then built a session career playing for top country, rock, and pop artists. He stays very current and can play great parts, but also has a high EQ for using effects to make sounds. He has been on Toby Keith albums, Tim McGraw albums, and I think he did the slide solo on Don't Let Me Be Lonely by the band Perry in 2013. Jerry is so incredibly versatile and so hip to effects and tones, and he has this amazing rig at his studio where he has a circle of guitar cabinets, and then he has a robot arm that moves around mics to go to the different cabs, and he's able to switch stuff out. If you want to get into that, you can watch the interview I did with him, but yeah, he's one of those guys that, I mean, you could have him play on anything, and he really paid his dues, during the 80s and 90s, touring with Amy Grant and learning about playing that kind of pop, kind of Christian pop and or just straight up pop guitar with them, but then also learned how to do the Nashville thing really well.
Mm-hmm. Up next is another one of my favorite guys, Kenny Greenberg. And Kenny Greenberg is a producer who plays guitar, and even though he was never a full-time session player doing thousands of sessions, the ones he did and does have a tendency to be big ones. On guitar, he's a pretty brash rocker. He picks the strings hard, and you can hear us playing the solo Until It's Gone by Kenny Chesney from 2015. So this is Kenny Greenberg.
Let's go. One life, one chance.
Yeah, so Kenny Greenberg, there's like 3 guys from Cleveland who are all Nashville people who end up on records and stuff. There's him, Tom Bukovac, and someone else I can't remember. Maybe Adam Schoenfeld, but yeah, so Kenny Greenberg whenever I hear the sound in a country record that's like where it's like all picked like that, and it's pentatonic, it's simple, but it sits in the track so well, and like each note is heard very clearly. That to me is a Kenny Greenberg sound that I just associate with him. And I noticed on a track I played on that I had to go back and listen to called Meet Your Mother by Jesse Ritter. I listened back to it and I realized I totally ripped off Kenny Greenberg when I was doing that. Like whatever I was thinking that day was just that completely that style of like that sort of thing. And it works. It's really fun. Like that's one of the first sounds that I kind of fell in love with was like big soaring things from Pat Buchanan, and then that just like aggressive pentatonic teenage angst energy of the Kenny Greenberg stuff.
Kenny tours with Kenny Chesney.
He does,
and you know he reproduces all those wonderful things live. So I mean it's a cool treat to get to see the guy that played on the record, you know, playing live.
Yeah, another guy who played on the record who plays live sometimes is Adam Schoenfeld. That's him on stage. He's a rock guy who played guitar for Big Kenny Elfin, and when Big Kenny and his friend John Rich made their first album together as Big and Rich, Adam got asked to play on it, and at that moment he quickly became an in-demand session player with an edgier sound than Nashville was used to. He's played on every Jason Aldean album, and one of the solos he played was on the 2019 song Tattoos and Tequila. So this is Adam Schoenfeld. Yeah, so that's Adam Schoenfeld. And Jason Aldean albums always have two guys, Adam Schoenfeld and Kurt Allison, playing electric guitars, and they're both like pretty rock, and I don't know which is which on the songs, but yeah, that was a big change in country music. Back around 2005 was when Jason's first single came out, and it had like a heavy riff to it. And then he's released a bunch of songs since then that have gotten super popular that had that kind of heavier sound. And so that was between that and Save a Horse Ride a Cowboy, which Adam Schoenfeld also played on. That's kind of the origin of bringing back sort of 80s rock and putting it into country music.
Yeah, the big rock stack sound. I mean,
Yeah.
he really brought that in.
And we have one more guy left on this timeline. We've gone all the way from Red Foley's 1949 guitarist all the way up now to Kelsey Ballerini's 2020 guitarist.
All right, Derek Wells is the son of session player and studio owner Kent Wells and got a job playing for Josh Turner in the 2000s. Then transitioned into being a session player, became one of the top guys, and now he's a successful producer as well. He plays a lot of really effecty stuff and has had some big hooks playing tenths, but he can also chicken pick, like in the solo of Hole in the Bottle by Kelsey Ballerini from 2020. And when I hear that, you know, I hear the influence of Brad Paisley and Britt Mason and all those guys that came before. And Derek is another one of those, you know, super versatile players. Yeah, his mom is a wonderful singer and songwriter and musician also. And yeah, just a great versatile player.
Yeah,
Does a lot of great work.
I picked that one because I like it. I like that playing style, and it kind of brings it back to like a country thing. Another thing that he's done a lot of, because it's just a popular style, like in the past 5 years, 10 years, is doing tenths, which is in the copy there. But it's that. It's when you have like the root note and then another note that's kind of way above it. Like there's a Mary Morris song called Girl that kind of had that. That kind of sound, that interval, that's like a thing that didn't really happen before like 2015, I feel like. Yeah. And so that's sort of a newer thing, and I know that he's played that on a few different songs. So that is the timeline. We have gone through 7 decades, and all those players played on so many things. Every single one of them is worth looking up and learning more about if you're into the history of Nashville music and any of the music that came out of here. If you were a child in the 70s, like those were the guys. If you're a child in the 90s, those were the guys. So yeah, that was a fun project to do. Look all these people up, because I really only knew about half these guys before a week ago when Zach texted me, said, "Hey, do you want to do a live stream?" And I said, "Yeah, I've been wanting to do this."
Yes. So I need to give full credit to the hard work that Jim put into this, and that he put all these audio samples together and isolated their solos, and and to do this live and to play all these cuts and everything. So thank you to Jim for making this happen. I just said, hey, let's do a live stream, and then he turned it into something that was so much bigger and cooler than what I had imagined. So thank you.
Thanks for asking me.
Yeah.
Anyone in chat asking questions about tackle boxes and air guitars?
No, I think
Okay, cool.
I think we're good. I think we can sign off. I guess we've gone almost 2 hours. So yeah. So all right, guys. Thank you so much for watching.